Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room. I'm Robin Adair, and with me, as always, my enigmatic co-host, John Juricic. And I say enigmatic because last time we did a show, John, you were singing "Oh Canada" over and over again because you were so worked up about Donald Trump. I'm afraid to think what you're going to sing now when he's brought in a 25% tariff on our steel and aluminum products. And this seems like this is just a new salvo from a guy who's out to destroy our country.
Yeah, well, what I don't want to be singing is any ode to Canada. Hope this doesn't break our country. What a jerk. The thing about this is be as mean as you want, be as authoritarian as you want. But can you allow your opponents to have some framework in which we can respond? Just a framework. He doesn't have any framework. This reminds me of being in elementary school when you were angry at somebody and you just emotionally couldn't hold it in. Okay? That was exemplified a week ago at the Super Bowl, which he flew in. And while he was flying, he decides to hold a press conference with a bunch of his buddies on the plane, announces an immediate 25% tariff on all imports of steel and aluminum. That includes Canada. We don't have any sense this was coming. We were told March 4th, he can't be believed about anything. That could be the most frustrating part about this jerk.
Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff. What about aluminum? Aluminum too. What about make America great again, right? That's what we care about. Okay.
This is terrible news for the country. It's especially awful for Southern Ontario. You have Steel Town, Hamilton, massive amount of industry where we have aluminum and steel products being manufactured and much of it shipped to the States and then shipped back and forth and back and forth. It's very hard on our car industry. It's a terrible, terrible punishment to a country. And we were supposed to be able to sit down and talk about this as neighbors. And instead, this bumwipe has decided to abuse his neighbor.
Oh, that's great. I reiterate, no sense of order, no discipline. If we could simply review some of these tariffs, done a tiny bit of research into how aluminum is made. Well, it's not just grows out of the ground. I mean, metals are combined. And the metals that are necessary to make aluminum, he does not have. So this is not based on any kind, the U.S. does not have that. This is not based on any kind of rational thinking and rebuilding his industry. He's just angry. And whoever he wakes up to and looks at on a map that he probably created himself is who he's going after today. So I tell you, it's hard to contain oneself. And I don't think that our relationship with the Americans will ever be the same.
Did you happen to see the map he had beside him on the plane? It shows the Gulf of America. He's arbitrarily renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. The guy's out of control, and you just wonder where this is all going to go. And at the same time, we've kind of laid this out on a platter, haven't we? I mean, what's Justin Trudeau thinking when he insults Trump behind his back and expects us still to be friends? And then we have a situation where right now, we're paying a price for actions taken a couple of years ago by our prime minister. Japan came hat in hand to Canada and said, we would like to import Canadian oil and gas from Canada. If you build pipelines and if you get the shipping, we will be happy to take that product and build an industry with you. And Trudeau said, no. He said, no, we're not ready to do that. And, Trudeau was too busy talking about a green economy and moving away from oil and gas and the nobility of jumping ahead of the rest of the country and the rest of the world, really, in terms of developing green environment and green economy and green energy, which isn't in place yet. We haven't got the mechanisms for that to really support a modern Western economy. And so he says, no, what happens then? What happens? Well, we have Donald Trump jump into the fray. Here we have the Prime Minister of Japan and Donald Trump meeting in Washington announcing that the Americans, yes, they'll be happy to sell oil and gas from Alaska And get this, it's $1 trillion deal they're talking about. $1 trillion deal that could have gone to Canada. And you know, Japan's not the only country. Germany also made this same reach out to Canada and said, we'd like your oil and gas. And of course, the Eastern pipeline that was supposed to go across Eastern Canada all the way to New Brunswick got stopped. And so we weren't in position to do anything about that either. And I think terrible leadership, terrible decision making. And it doesn't end there. We also have Justin Trudeau sort of downplaying this whole thing about methamphetamines going across the border from Canada into the United States. We only produce 1% of it, he says, you know, and it may be that the Mexicans are more guilty of allowing methamphetamine to come north from their country. However, Canada doesn't get off scot-free when we hear about a methamphetamine lab that has just been busted right here in Greater Vancouver.
I'm so angry at being attacked. And yet the points you've made, more specifically around some of the drug issues related to Canada, they're true. One of the biggest meth labs were just discovered in Vancouver. Chinese and Iranians were involved in the Lower Mainland. So despite Ottawa saying this isn't a problem, it is. Most of the drugs are being shipped to the U.S. Trudeau and company look bad in the middle of this tariff crisis.
And yet somehow, Johnny, there's actually a silver lining for the Trudeau and company group. Not Trudeau himself, but there is a silver lining. There is a hope now that the polls are pointing to. What's that about?
Well, such an emotional roller coaster. I'm telling you, up and down, who to protect, who to get angry at. Look, recent polls are showing the Liberals are now getting closer to the Conservatives. And that was 10 minutes ago. Who knows what it'll be in half an hour? I can't believe that these trends go up and down. Up. Recent polling, according to Leger, has Mark Carney. Mark Carney was the prime minister right now. If he was the prime minister, we'd have 39% support. Well, the Conservatives will only be at 38%. Guess what? I don't believe any of this crap. We'll not say that. We'll not say that on our own show, Robin. I don't believe any of it. I know there is we Canadians are on an emotional roller coaster. I wouldn't attribute any kind of trending to these polls that are going on right now. At some point, we got to come out of this and listen to the facts and listen to the solutions and who's providing those solutions that haven't worked for 9 years.
Well, let's talk about the polls a little bit, John. And you know, I can't say I'm shocked to see that the Liberals have come up. They've been on the air every day. They're Team Canada. They're fighting the evil Donald Trump. People are rallying around that because people are angry at the United States, and it makes sense that way. Even Trudeau, I think, is not as unpopular at this very moment, that he has been for quite some time. And Mark Carney, let's face it, he hasn't made a mistake yet because he hasn't been prime minister yet. He's sort of somebody who's coming out of the weeds, but he's the great anointed one, according to the Liberals. He's been the head of the Bank of Canada, the head of the Bank of England, and everybody thinks, well, boy, he must be smart. And so they're giving him the benefit of the doubt, and I think that's just fine. But I do think that poll that you just read, where it's a very neck-and-neck race, is a little deceiving. If you look at other surveys that have also taken place over the last week, they closely match each other in terms of percentages, and almost all of them point to a Conservative majority still. The Conservatives have dropped in some of their support, but they are still ahead. Here's an example. The Nanos poll that was just taken last week. Conservatives, 38% support. That translates into 182 seats. The Liberals at 30% support. They have come up. They're now going to be the official opposition if all these numbers hold at 105 seats. The Bloc Québécois, they're really only relevant in Quebec, but they have 8% support. 37 seats, which shows you they have way too many seats in Quebec. NDP, 16% support across the country. That turns into 17 seats. 2% support, 2 seats. And this works out, again, John, to a Conservative majority if these numbers hold.
Through all of this frustration, especially that I've been expressing today, the solution to solving these issues are solutions. Who has said, in fact, how are we going to diversify our economy? Well, so far, only the Conservatives. Who has so far said how we're going to deal with crime and healthcare crisis? So far, only conservatives. They actually have said these things. These are things we're going to do. Maybe not in as much detail as we'll get in the election, but they're actually creating a platform. I've not heard that from the Liberal side. And so when we can finally compare platforms and determine how Canada's going to react in what is actually a new world, then I'm going to start to believe the polling.
You know, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. But the Liberals, as we know, because they have been a party in power for many, many decades off and on, have the ability to change their stripes. And I think definitely under Justin Trudeau, the Liberal Party went far, far, far more to the left than they have ever been in recent memory. I mean, he has been running giant deficits, not just during the pandemic, but the debt has grown exponentially since Justin Trudeau became prime minister nearly 10 years ago. And, you know, there were very conservative liberal prime ministers in the past. This isn't one of them. The Liberals need to move back to reasonable management of the economy. They need to show signs that they can be good masters of the economy, not overspenders. And at the same time, they have to step in and do something about the business community. They have to look at pipelines. They have to look at businesses that are going to be able to thrive in an economy that is building and is free enterprise and is open for business. And it can't all be based on hiring more civil servants and building the size of government. We need an economy that is diverse, not just diversified in markets, but diversified in the way the country operates. And then we also have to look at, as you mentioned, John, what's going on with our catch and release situation, where our criminals are running amok and they may be arrested, but they don't spend time in jail, and they spend a lot of time in bail and go out and commit the same crime. And this can't be allowed to continue. There's an expectation that somehow this makes us a more understanding people, a kinder people, a gentler people than some of our neighbors, but this isn't effective. It's not working. We need to move towards making sure that people who need help are helped, people who need to be incarcerated, that's what happens to them. And that has to happen more readily in the future. Liberals can move towards that. No one's saying the Liberals have to stay where they are now, but they have been governed very much, I believe, by the fringe, so-called progressive side of their party. They need to move away from that if they ever hope to be able to occupy the true center of the country and be a viable government again.
Of course, if they did that and listened to this very pragmatic advice, they'd become the conservatives. And so that's not going to happen. And in fact, those two that are the front runners, Carney and Chrystia Freeland, actually represent what the Liberals have done in the past in now two terms, and that isn't working. This is not difficult. We want affordability. We want some future for our children. We want to control our homelessness situation and control drug violence, and drug health care. We want to be strong and diverse and have a strong economy. We actually have maybe the strongest resource-based economy in the planet, if not the universe. Oh, Canada! Oh, sorry, slipped into it, baby. So, can we simply get down to a normal government that deals with their citizens in a very positive and economically progressive way, and not cater to the fringes that are slowly, if not already, have ruined our country?
Well, it'd be nice if we didn't run the country like it's some sort of a religious organization. But, you know, I do think that we as Canadians can be very proud of the fact that so many Canadians are upset about the way things are going right now. They're upset about our response towards the Americans, or at least leading up to this crisis with the Americans. I think they're now rallying around what they're being told about. We've got to do something. And Canadians are not. They are not buying products that are made in the United States in our grocery stores. Apparently, very few Canadians are crossing the border into places like Blaine, Washington, because, well, for one thing, our dollars dropped down to below 70 cents, so it's not exactly a bargain to shop there. But Canadians are as a point of patriotism, not going to the United States, not for holidays, not to shop, not for anything. And I think that's a very positive thing to see. But what happens to our business community here in Victoria, on Vancouver, right across the country? How does business deal with this if we are going to turn our back on the Americans? There could be a cost to pay. Certainly, if you go to a grocery store, you're not seeing nearly as many groceries from the United States on sale, and everything that's Canadian is clearly marked. There's a big movement there, and I think it's moving right across the gambit of the business community. And I thought, well, geez, we should find out more how the business community is going to respond to this, how they're going to respond to it locally, albeit we don't have industry so much here on the West Coast, but we do have a lot of patriotism. So how is this going to affect our business community, how they do business in the months ahead? So we thought we would track down our old pal, Jeff Bray, from the Victoria Downtown Business Association, and he would give us the scoop. Let's zoom him in. And now joining us in the Victoria Rumble Room, first time since the Christmas holidays, is Jeff Bray, who, as it happens, has also just been on a little holiday out skiing. And he's now back in the saddle and ready to answer questions about what's going on with the business community. And Jeff, I know you haven't had a chance to talk to a lot of your members in the last day or so, but what do you think the pulse is right now? How do you think the business community is feeling about all of this talk of a trade war? Is there nervousness?
I think there is a certain amount because there's a great deal of uncertainty. The president announces something for January 1st, then it's January 4th, then it's February 1st, then it's only going to be certain items. Our responses as a nation is going to be, calculated against whatever tariffs may come in. So that uncertainty in the slowest quarter of the year for most small and medium-sized businesses, isn't a great feeling. And I think, there's nervousness around consumer confidence because, of course, that's a big driver for retail and hospitality. Supply chain issues, again, if we recall back during the pandemic, one of the big things that became apparent was how reliant we were on global supply chains and how quickly they can get disrupted, which really impacts, again, small and medium-sized businesses. So I think there's a certain amount of uncertainty, and that adds to worry. But not quite knowing what's happening also means it's very hard for businesses to really plan for a shift in inventory, a shift in marketing. So I think general uncertainty, which adds concern to any independent small and medium-sized business.
All right, let's talk about boycotting. Boycotting 101. Let's call it that. Boycotting 101. I talked with Mary Lou Newbold, who is the board chair for Think Local Victoria, and she made a really good point around don't boycott local businesses until they've gone through their American inventory. So that's already, I never thought of that, right? Like, okay, they've bought it. The Americans have got the money from us, so it's fair if we're going to be boycotting, not to hurt our local businesses. In our Canadian grocery stores across the country, I just went to Costco just this past weekend, and I was confused. Like, where are the Canadian products? Which are the ones that are being made here, but maybe processed down there and they come back? There's a lot of gray area, Jeff. You can buy Budweiser, you can buy Coors beer in BC. It's brewed and bottled in Canada, but it's yet an American brand. Mm-hmm. So how do you wade through this? What do you suggest?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to look at. The first is, the sort of general idea of the boycott is it's our local way, individual way to sort of retaliate against the trade war that's being imposed upon us. So it that sort of makes a lot of sense, I think, to most people. But of course, if you go to your local, and let's use Starbucks as an example. Starbucks, the Starbucks we have in our community are Starbucks, part of Starbucks Canada. It's easy to say we're going to boycott Starbucks, but what does that do to local employment? What does that do to the local suppliers who supply other things to the Starbucks? So I would always sort of say that we need to really think about what we're actually trying to achieve and who's ultimately going to be hurt by boycotts. The other thing that I'd suggest is, there's there's the buying local from a retailer, say an independent retailer, who sells things that are made in the States. Well, boycotting the American-made product may feel good, but that business will probably just have to close up, and all that employment and that tax that they collect on behalf of government is gone, and doesn't really have a significant impact on the U.S., but certainly hurts local. Versus buying online through Amazons and others, where perhaps we can have a more direct impact without hurting, our friends and neighbors who rely on those paychecks.
Would it be
To take
useful,
their rent.
Jeff? Do you think it'd be useful for organizations like yourself and other business organizations to put out lists, helpful lists to the public saying, here are areas or segments of the economy where you could make a difference? And of course, people look very easily at things like the bourbon industry out of Kentucky and say, I'm not buying that during this. And I think that's already being felt. I saw the governor of Kentucky on the air already saying this is a real bad thing. So would it be something useful if this really goes down the pipe and becomes a true trade war for organizations like yours to get in there and sort of give us all some friendly advice on what should be done?
Well, I mean, again, that's something we could take a look at, but not knowing what actually what tariffs are being applied, and what countermeasures are being applied, it's really, again, hard for anybody to really sort of plan. This is going to either happen or not happen, and then we're all going to have to respond very quickly. And again, I'm always, to be honest, I'm very nervous to ever. Because most of my members, I have 1,800 members in the Downtown Victoria Business Association. Most are local, small and medium-sized independent businesses. I'm very nervous to ever put anything out that might deflect local buying from local companies, even if they're selling an American-made product, because at the end of the day, that's going to hurt us a lot more than it's going to hurt the U.S. But it is something I think, groups like the Downtown Victoria Business Association, the Chamber of Commerce can certainly take a look at. I mean, we're all talking about this issue, and we're all looking to see what's going to happen, and then how do we respond on behalf of our collective membership.
Jeff, back to this whole boycotting issue, it's confusing. And I don't want to hurt my Canadian business person down the street. So a little bit more questions. A lot of products we bring in are made in the USA, like clothing, skis, cars, right? There's a long list. These things could suddenly now be very much more expensive, particularly with our dollar crashing, I don't know, below 70 cents for sure. Our buying power is diminishing. If a settlement with the American isn't reached, just how bad can this get? Are we talking COVID? Are we talking 09 depression type economy?
I think it's, again, if it's a full across-the-board tariff on everything, then yes, I think you're going to see a significant drop in GDP, which almost assuredly will lead to a recession or near recession. It'll probably force the Bank of Canada, on the other hand, to lower interest rates further to try to counter that, which, depending on what type of business you have or your own personal circumstances, may actually not be the worst thing in the world, funnily enough. I mean, I get a sense that a lot of people are sort of tuning the president out a little bit, because we've had these pronouncements and then pullbacks and pronouncements and pullbacks that I think some are probably just saying, we'll wait till it actually happens, because we can't keep twisting ourselves in knots. But I think 25% across the board cut will have a definite drag on the Canadian economy. And depending on where you are and what type of employment you have, it may or may not impact you. Obviously, if you work in the forestry sector or some of those sectors where we're exporting everything, it's going to have a significant impact. If you're selling, products not from the U.S. and you're a local business, it may have less of an impact on you.
So I want to ask you, Jeff, about, you can take this from the fact you have a background as a politician. Long ago, you were a member of the BC Liberal Caucus and Victoria Beacon Hill. You were the MLA, and now, of course, have gone into the business community full gunnels, and so you have a lot of knowledge on both sides of the fence. And what I'm seeing now is a concerted effort by the politicians to get down to Washington and get that message across to America how bad this is. I think all the premiers have gone down en masse to meet with their counterparts in the States. The business community, I suspect, would like to do the same. Our Canadian Chamber of Commerce, other business groups. And we had the province of Ontario at the Super Bowl. There were the Super Bowl ads, and you're watching all these ads, and suddenly on comes this one from the province of Ontario.
For generations, this ally to the north has been by your side. Ontario, Canada. A partner connected by shared history, shared values, and a shared vision for what we can achieve together. Stable and secure when the world around us isn't. You can rely on Ontario for energy to power your growing economy and for the critical minerals crucial to new technologies. Ontario is your third largest trading partner and the #1 export destination for 17 states. Our long-standing economic partnership keeps millions of Americans working. In a changing world, it's time to bring jobs back home and build together. More workers, more trade, more prosperity, more security. For generations, this ally to the north has been here. And for generations more, we'll still be here, right by your side.
So there we have the province of Ontario. Is it time for the province of BC maybe to sit down and plan? Has there been any talk of this? I mean, obviously these are very early days, but it seems to me that a concerted message to our friends, even in Washington State, because they're wondering where we are. How come we haven't come down to see them? And I'm sure we don't want to discourage folks from coming up still from the United States to spend their hard-earned dollars in the summertime, and we have this cruise ship business. Is it time for us to be sending a message as well to Americans, reminding them that we're not bad people, and maybe they should tell their government to be nicer to us?
Well, I certainly think that part of the strategy that the premiers and the bureaucrats that are down in the States are talking to a variety of different political leaders and from both parties, I think, to deliver that message. So I would be shocked and surprised if a BC contingent that's down in Washington is not talking to Washington State senators and Congress people to deliver that message, both in terms of the general response, but also the great sort of synergies that we have here in what some call Cascadia, and that we're a little bit removed from some of this political intrigue that happens in Ottawa and Washington. So I'm pretty sure that BC is having those conversations. I do think that, we certainly don't want to weaponize trade or weaponize travel, certainly for our neck of the woods. Victoria had a very strong tourism season last year. It was very important to our local economy. Things are currently shaping up to be strong this year. I suspect that, most Americans have made the travel plans. They've booked their cruises. Those things have happened. It's probably, if we do have these across the board tariffs, it'll start to appear maybe in the third quarter of this year, where all of a sudden some Americans decide not to come down. I would suggest, though, that 34 cents on the dollar probably overcomes a lot of other issues when you're looking on where you're going to spend and get value for your dollar. That's different for us, who may well decide that, I go down every year for a Blue Jays weekend in Seattle. Well, I'm not going this year. And so I think you may see some Canadians opt out of going down to Seattle or down to Portland. But I don't see the same thing necessarily happening in reverse, certainly not in 2025. But I think that there may come a point in time when we would want to have contingents from our provincial government going down to Olympia and having those conversations with state legislators and the governor and saying, we've been great friends in this part of the world for a long time, and we have strong alliances and reliances. You need to go back to Washington and point that out to the administration.
Certainly, Jeff, these are uncharted times. One could say. I think with quite a bit of confidence. I've recently chatted with friends who are really emotionally unsettled. They're troubled. They're losing sleep. These folks otherwise would never listen to a podcast in their life. They would never participate in a political discussion, are now really, what do we do? It's sort of like I never faced this kind of challenge before. All right. Tell us, therefore, how things are emotionally and realistically from a business side in Victoria. I sense it was a good holiday season because Trump wasn't president. Do you remain optimistic? I suppose you do after indicating the favorable dollar circumstances, but what is your sort of long-term, what's your elevator pitch to someone saying, oh my gosh, I'm losing sleep over this. Help
Is
me.
this going to be COVID too, Jeff?
Well, I mean, that was sort of going to be part of my answer, I think, which is, when the pandemic hit, and it also had huge economic impacts, a great deal of uncertainty, unprecedented times, all of those things. Part of what we did in the capital region, which I think we did better than many other parts of the country, was we said, okay, how do we help our neighbors? How do we help our local businesses? Making those purposeful local shopping decisions, I think was really important. I think what you're going to find for some of our businesses in the midterm, if we see large scale tariffs, is how do we develop new supply chains? How do we develop new inventories and new markets? And to use that often quoted word, pivot, so that we aren't so reliant on the trading partner. The other emotional side that I'll say to that is, and you're starting to see the narrative in some of the Canadian national press is, I think there's tremendous disappointment that we have taken with great pride this friendship we've had with Americans and the great trading relationship and the longest unguarded border in the world. And so we are feeling this, quite strongly. There seems to be a sense that there's just a collective shrug from the American public. And I think what I'm hearing from some folks is that may be the bigger disappointment is, we, I think, have really enjoyed this relationship and take it seriously. And now we're sensing that perhaps the American public,
Well, many thanks to Jeff Bray for making the time to lay out his thoughts and feelings about the business community and its relationship to what's going on right now with the fear of a trade war with the United States. Of course, we're all hoping this doesn't happen. We're all hoping that Donald Trump will say, well, no, I never really meant to cause a trade war. This is just a bargaining position, and he's done that in the past. So we'll have to wait and see. But it's bad. It's a very bad situation, and the only thing we can do on this Rumble Room is try to bring these issues to the forefront because we want to create dialogue. We want you to talk to your friends and family. You don't have to agree with everything we're saying. We just think it's important that people talk about this, and as Canadians get themselves prepared for all the different things that could happen in the near future. And with that, John, it's time to wrap another show. Perhaps you could tell people again about our website. We have a new website, and about all the different platforms where you can see the Victoria Rumble Room on a weekly basis.
Yeah, Robin, thank you. No, Trump is unbridled. I think there's a man that doesn't care what he's doing or what he's going to say. And on any given time that we have this Rumble Room and do our show, there could be a war. There could be taking over countries. There could be thousands and thousands of people being suffer from his policies. So as we talk about it, you can watch us. And that is on our new webpage. Thank you, Kelly Darwin and West Shore Web Hosting for helping us take that, bring that up and keep and maintaining it. Obviously, we're very active on a whole bunch of social media sites, particularly Twitter, Facebook. All of our interviews are on YouTube. And you can spend a whole weekend binging the Victoria Rumble Room, all 500 of them. Hey, what do you think about that? Yeah, I know you want to do that. Okay. And we're also on TikTok, Instagram, and we have a podcast site that you can listen to us on earphones. And so, I don't know. This is fantastic. I think we're in a historically unique place, and I'm glad we have a platform to talk about these issues, Robin.
Well, I am too, John. John, I appreciate the fact that you sang "O Canada" last week, and it was very inspiring. And you went, "O Canada, I'm John Juricic," and then I responded by, well, not giving you like a Grammy award for it, but I just want to say that I admire the fact you're such a patriot. I admire all of my friends that I've spoken to over the last couple of weeks of how people feel so passionately about our country and so passionately that we need to get together and join forces. So if that's a rallying cry, I encourage you to rally and rumble on.